The rain had no mercy that night. It came down in thick, slanting sheets, pounding the cracked windshield of Daniel Carter's old sedan as if trying to force its way inside. The wipers squeaked with every exhausted swipe, struggling to keep up, but Daniel barely noticed. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles pale, his jaw clenched as the words from earlier that evening replayed again and again in his head. "We're letting you go, Daniel. Budget cuts. Nothing personal. Nothing personal." That was what they always said. Yet it felt deeply personal when you were a single father with an 8-year-old son waiting at home, trusting you to make everything okay. Daniel exhaled slowly, fogging up the glass for a moment before the heater caught up. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message from his neighbor, "Evan's asleep." "Don't worry." Daniel allowed himself the faintest smile. Evan. That boy was the reason he kept going even when the world seemed determined to knock him flat. Since Evan's mother passed away 3 years earlier, life had been a constant balancing act: school runs, late shifts, unpaid bills, and now, unemployment. The storm outside felt like a mirror of the chaos inside his chest. Traffic crawled along the narrow road that cut through the older part of town. Most people avoided it at night, especially in weather like this, but Daniel always took this route. It was quieter, gave him time to think. As his headlights sliced through the rain, something ahead caught his eye, a dark shape near the bus stop. Daniel slowed instinctively. There, hunched beneath the flickering shelter light, was an old man. His coat looked too thin for the weather, soaked through, clinging to his frail frame. He wasn't holding an umbrella. He wasn't even sitting. Just standing there, shoulders shaking, whether from cold or exhaustion, Daniel couldn't tell. Daniel drove past the stop by a few meters, then stopped. His mind argued with itself immediately. "You're late. You're broke. You don't even know this man." But another voice, quieter, stubborn, reminded him of something his father used to say: "Character is what you do when helping costs you something." Daniel glanced at the clock. Then at the bus stop in the rearview mirror. The buses had stopped running hours ago. With a tired sigh, Daniel shifted into reverse and pulled up beside the shelter. He rolled down the window despite the rain splashing in. "Sir," he called out. The old man turned slowly, eyes wide with surprise. Up close, Daniel could see the deep lines carved into his face, the silver stubble on his chin, the way his hands trembled slightly. "Yes," the man replied, his voice nearly lost to the storm. "Where are you headed?" Daniel asked. The old man hesitated. "Riverside," he said softly. "But, it's fine. I'll manage." Daniel knew Riverside. It was miles away. In this weather, on foot, it was nearly impossible. "Get in," Daniel said, already reaching across to unlock the passenger door. "I'll take you." The man stared at him as if he hadn't heard correctly. "I couldn't possibly." "It's no trouble," Daniel interrupted, though that wasn't entirely true. "You'll catch your death out here." After a moment, the old man nodded, gratitude washing over his features. He opened the door and climbed in, water dripping onto the worn floor mat. The car filled with the smell of rain and old fabric. "Thank you," the man said. "Truly." They drove in silence for a while, the storm drumming steadily above them. Daniel focused on the road, but his thoughts kept drifting back to his firing. To Evan. To the rent due next week. The old man finally spoke. "Rough night?" he asked gently. Daniel let out a dry chuckle. "You could say that." "Lost my job today," Daniel added before he could stop himself. "Single dad. Not exactly ideal timing." The old man nodded slowly, as if he understood far more than he was saying. "Life has a way of testing us when we're already tired." Daniel glanced at him. There was something about the man's tone, calm, steady, that eased the tightness in his chest. What about you? Daniel asked. Why were you out there in this storm? The old man looked out the window, watching the rain race down the glass. Sometimes, he said, we have to walk through storms to remind ourselves who we are. Daniel didn't quite understand, but he felt the weight of the words settle somewhere deep inside him. They continued driving, unaware that this simple act of kindness, this one decision made on the worst night of Daniel's life, was already setting something extraordinary into motion. By the time Daniel dropped the old man off at a quiet house near Riverside, the rain had softened to a mist. The man stepped out, then turned back. You didn't have to do this, he said. Daniel shrugged. Maybe not. But I wanted to. The old man smiled, a knowing smile that lingered longer than expected. Then I suspect tomorrow may surprise you, he said, before closing the door and disappearing into the night. Daniel drove home thinking nothing of it. He had no idea that by the next morning, everything would change. Daniel barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the storm returned, the sound of rain hammering metal, the image of the old man's tired eyes, and those strange words echoing in his head, tomorrow may surprise you. He rolled onto his side, staring at the faint glow of the alarm clock on the nightstand. 4:37 a.m. His mind raced through numbers, rent, groceries, Evan's school fees, calculations that never seemed to end well. When morning finally came, it arrived without mercy. Gray light seeped through the curtains, matching the heaviness in Daniel's chest. He forced himself out of bed, dressed quietly, and stepped into the kitchen where Evan sat at the table, swinging his legs, cereal untouched. Dad, Evan said, looking up with hopeful eyes. Are you going to work today? The question landed like a punch. Daniel knelt beside him, forcing a smile. Not today, buddy. But that's okay. We'll figure things out. Evan nodded, trusting him completely, and that trust both strengthened and terrified Daniel. After dropping Evan at school, Daniel drove aimlessly for a while, unsure what to do with a day that suddenly had no structure. Eventually, habit pulled him toward his old workplace, a mid-sized logistics company where he'd worked for nearly 10 years, always early, always dependable, never complaining. He parked across the street, not planning to go in, just needing to see it one last time. As he sat there, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then answered. Mr. Carter, a firm voice asked. This is Human Resources. Could you come in immediately? Daniel's heart dropped. I was already terminated, he said carefully. There was a pause. Yes, that's what we need to discuss. Confused and wary, Daniel stepped out of the car and walked toward the building. Inside, the atmosphere felt different, tense, hushed. People avoided eye contact. When he reached the conference room, the door was already open. Sitting inside were 2 HR managers, a legal representative, and, shockingly, his boss, Richard Hayes, looking pale and furious. Daniel barely had time to sit before the senior HR manager spoke. Daniel, first, we owe you an apology. Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous, he barked, but no one acknowledged him. The HR manager continued. Last night, information came to light regarding unethical conduct, abuse of authority, and wrongful termination decisions made by Mr. Hayes. Daniel's head spun. I don't understand, he said honestly. The legal representative slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, emails, timestamps, evidence. Your termination was not due to budget cuts, she said. It was retaliation. And it violates company policy. Richard stood abruptly. You can't do this, he shouted. I built this department. The senior HR manager met his gaze coldly. And effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. Silence crashed down like thunder. Daniel felt like he was watching someone else's life unfold. Richard stormed out, face red with rage, while Daniel sat frozen, heart pounding. "Daniel," the HR manager said gently, "your position is reinstated."